I've had terrible luck with technology today, so let's hope nothing explodes while I'm filming. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my July wrap-up. Before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what was the worst book you read in July. Okay, so once again, I am incredibly shocked that it is already August. How the heck was yesterday the 1st? Where did July go? Disappeared. As normal, let's hit up my stats for the month. I read 9 books this month. Not my best, but still pretty good. Across those, I read about 3,518 pages, so pretty solid page count still. Unfortunately, my average rating dropped this month. It was about 3.58 stars. And then my genre breakdown included 3 romance books, 4 fantasies, and 2 mysteries. So this month, I thought it would be fun to do my ranking of my worst book to my best book, and then I realized my worst book of the month I'm not going to talk about in this video because I'm using it for something coming up here soon. But I will tell you it was Seafire by Natalie C. Parker, and this is a futuristic pirate story. It's kind of similar to Firefly, where it has a sci-fi feel, but the characters themselves are basically pirates. It is a all-female crew, and they are working to try and bring down this head of a evil empire that is ruling the seas and is responsible for many of the women's on this ship's family's deaths. Like I said, not going to give an official rating, but no, it was my lowest book of the month. After that one is going to be So We Meet Again by Suzanne Park, and I received a arc of this from NetGalley. The story is following our main character, Jessie, who unfortunately has recently lost her Wall Street job. She ends up moving back with her parents and decides to start her own company. I don't really know what to list her business as. It is a mix between a meal box service and a sort of social media based presence, similar to that of like Tastemade or Tasty. Along the way, she ends up getting some help from a childhood enemy named Daniel, and sparks fly. After reading Park's last romance, Loathe at First Sight, I really enjoyed her writing there and the storyline around empowering women in business fields. However, with this one, I went in hoping that we were going to get more romance, and I do think she leaned into it a bit more, but not enough for the entire marketing of this book to be focused around romance. In reality, I would say it's 50-50 with a base contemporary about women in business fields, women starting their own businesses, or shattering the glass ceiling and the bamboo ceiling, awesome things like that, but not what I was expecting when I went into it. Not to be completely negative, again, I really enjoy Park's writing. I actually laughed a lot in this. It was just a very fun time, and I specifically loved the descriptions around the food in this story. It made me so hungry. I've been craving bibimbap ever since. Watching Jessie stick it to her old job, fantastic. Love to see it. And then at the same time, bonding and improving her relationship with her mom around this business that she's creating. So wholesome, so sweet. I love how we saw the shift of her perception around her mother. So well written. Also, main romance trope, enemies to lovers, and we know I love that. With that being said, I really enjoyed the shift from enemies to friends. However, I think the turn to lovers was a little fast. There was tons of sexual tension between the 2 main leads, but then there is a miscommunication issue about halfway through the book that then causes us to rear back into enemies territory, and that really threw me off because it messed with the entire flow of usual romance books. Even once the 2 main characters got back together, it was a fade to black scene and left me a little annoyed because apparently I don't like clean romances, I'm learning. I must say, the synopsis of this book gives so much away. I read the synopsis and really thought all of that was going to happen in, say, the first 25% of the book. No, that gives you probably the first 80%. Do not read the synopsis. Listen to what I just said earlier when describing it. In the end, it made for a very predictable story because I knew literally everything that was going to happen. My issue with this was the same thing I had with Park's last book, which is this was marketed to me as a romance book. And in the end, it was not at all what I went in expecting, so unfortunately, I was let down. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. The very base of the story isn't about Jessie finding love. It is about Jessie finding a career that she enjoys and then improving herself. After that one, I read A Torch Against the Night by 𝗖cie his𝘁, and I buddy read this with Dasha over at Mythic Pages. You know the drill. This is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series, and it is a series revolving around these 2 individuals who are attempting to bring down an empire from opposing sides. This second book has an additional perspective in it as well. While I knew who it was going in, I don't think you're actually supposed to know, so I'm not gonna say. While I thought Ember and the Ashes was a great first installment in this series, this one just kind of felt good enough. Plot still has me very intrigued. It's got its hooks in me. I need to know, what is the end game of this story? How are these idiots going to end up saving their entire world? Well, not world, but like country, empire, I don't know. That being said, however, the other 2/3 of this book were really, really hard to push through. Specifically because I can't stand 2 out of 3 of the narrators. One of our protagonists who is working to bring down this empire is Laia, and she's very new and unexperienced, doesn't really understand what she is doing here, which is clearly seen because God is she dumb at times. The romantic element and her point of view is just so unbearable, constantly has me rolling my eyes. Instead, I really wish that that time was instead given to the magical elements of the story, because I think those have been underutilized thus far and I want to see more of them. In the first book, I said the same thing, and we saw more of them here, but still not enough. The other perspective that I can't stand is capable of doing things decently half the time, and then the other half, it's like they were born without a brain and just end up running into situations and making everything worse. Because of this, it made it very difficult to root for either of them because I don't believe they have the means to accomplish what they're trying to do. Specifically for the second one I mentioned, we're constantly told that this person is a master at what they do, but nothing I have seen tells me that. The male perspective, who is also the other protagonist, Elias, I really enjoyed him. The trauma we see in this was very interesting. I really love the development of his character in this story. I'm very impressed with 𝗖cie his𝘁·𝗰𝘁 writing because this is a very gritty and dark YA fantasy. His perspective allowed for more of the exploration of magic in this world, and I loved to see it. I really enjoyed how that was handled. Again, I just want more of it. Same with the first book. There's a few plot twists that happen in this that I think are supposed to be shocking, but apart from one, I actually always see them coming and I'm not terribly surprised by that. I don't know if it's just because this is a YA fantasy and I've read a lot of those at this point or what, but this was a frustrating read to finish. I had things I liked, I had things I didn't. I actually did consider DNFing the series after this one, but dang it, I need to know what's going to happen. I need to know. So in the end, I gave this 3 stars. After that, the first book I finished this month was One Last Stop by 𝗖cie mich. This was a carryover from last month. I was very excited going into this because I love red, white, and royal blue. I really tried to put my expectations on the back burner when reading this, and I think because of that, I enjoyed it more than some people, but at the same time, this was not a new favorite. This story is following our main character, August, who recently moved to New York City. She ends up falling in love at first sight with this beautiful girl she sees on the subway, and then eventually realizes that said girl is displaced out of time and can't leave the subway. There are multiple other side plots going on, and like many other people, that is one of my biggest complaints. I think there was way too much happening here, and starting positive, fantastic casual diversity across the board. I really love that sapphic romances are starting to get more attention in popular media. I fell in love with many of the side characters in this story, particularly Nico, even though I am not a big believer in horoscopes and I don't really believe in psychics. He was hilarious and I just loved hearing about him. I want an entire story around him and his girlfriend Mila. I was so on board for the time travel aspect of the story. I very much enjoy time loops and this felt sort of similar to it. Because of it, actually, there is kind of a historical fiction feel to certain parts of the book because there's lots of mentions to history and culture of the 1970s, specifically in New Orleans and New York. On top of that, I do think that New York itself is a very overdone setting, but I think 𝗖cie mich managed to write it fairly well where it seemed realistic. Same thing with this as red, white, and royal blue. I just love 𝗖cie mich writing. It is so clever and funny and really keeps me reading even when the plot started to drag, which yeah, the plot dragged because there was just way too much going on. Honestly, August didn't really need to be in school. I don't understand why she was, because it played no major part in the story except to show us that August has a fear of commitment. The drag show portion, very fun, had a good time, didn't add anything to the plot. Saving Billy's also was just kind of odd. It felt more like it was utilized for convenience sake when trying to save Jane. All of this made for really weird pacing and made the end of the book where we are trying to save Jane from this time rift very rushed, and I mean, that should have been the main focus. Speaking of Jane, she was very one note. She just didn't hook me as much as any of the other characters. I don't think she had near the amount of depth. I know I said I didn't want to compare this to red, white, and royal blue, but it really hurt in comparison to the characterization of Prince Henry, who I love Anyway, I liked the mystery aspect that's surrounding August's uncle. Her uncle disappeared when her mom was a teenager, I think, and her mom has since been trying to solve this mystery. But how it connects to the story in the end felt so unrealistic. And yes, I realize I'm saying that about a story in which there is a time rift and a person from the 70s is somehow in the 2020s. I understand. I still maintain it. It just seemed way too convenient. In the end, an enjoyable read, not a new favorite. I do still prefer Red, White, and Royal Blue, but if you're really wanting a new sapphic romance story, I would say to pick it up. I gave this about 3.5 stars. After that one, I read Out of Character by Annabeth Albert, and this was also a ARC that I received from NetGalley. This is the second book in the, True Colors series. The first book was Conventionally Yours, so naturally I went into this with fairly high expectations. I didn't love it as much as Conventionally Yours, but I did still really enjoy it. So this book is following our two characters, Milo and Jasper. Milo ended up losing his brother's coveted Odyssey cards in a drunk bet and ends up asking Jasper, who is his childhood best friend, to help him win them back or find them in some way. We end up discovering pretty early on that Jasper and Milo had a big falling out in high school and have not been good friends since. So this kind of has a friends to enemies to lovers scenario, and I was definitely on board for it. This definitely falls into the new adult category, specifically because the writing around the characters in terms of dialogue and comedy style can be a bit immature, but there's a lot more heavier topics talked about, and I think that's a perfect way of characterizing people who are in their 20s, where you don't really feel like a teenager anymore, but you don't quite feel like an adult either. I did enjoy Milo and Jasper. Milo is more of a jock, and Jasper is definitely on the nerdier side. They both have very distinct personalities. Milo is more of a loner and cares a great deal about what other people think of him, whereas Jasper is very carefree and a big father hen. He loves to take care of people. Unfortunately, I just didn't really fall in love with them as much as I did Conrad and Alden from the first book. That being said, we do get little tidbits of Conrad and Alden in this, and I was living for them. Because we alternate between both of their perspectives, I do think both of their voices were fairly distinct for most of the book, but towards the end they started to blur a little. I think part of this might be because Jasper really starts to rub off on Milo. Speaking of which, Milo has a fantastic character arc in this story. I really recommend it for that aspect alone. Because of their history, there's lots of tension between the two of them, and I love to see that play out. As much as I liked to see them as a couple, for how long this story is, I do think the transition from enemies to friends to lovers should have lasted a bit longer. This book has a few more smut scenes than Conventionally Yours. They're not terribly explicit, but they are more PG-13 rated, but I don't think that really was necessary. I felt like that time could have been utilized in improving their relationship. The plot in this one was pretty slow. It felt as though it was taking forever for them to make any real developments in trying to find the cards or win them back. Once again, Albert does a fantastic job of sliding in casual diversity and representation in her characters. Both of the boys are gay, so are many of the other side characters, but along with that, Milo has a limp and April, I think was her name, Jasper's little sister, suffers from a chronic illness. Also in this one, same as Conventionally Yours, I just loved the discussions and showcasing of nerd culture. Specifically, this one more focuses on cosplaying, and that's really awesome. Jasper and his friends do a cosplay group and will go to visit hospitals, and he ends up dragging Milo into it. I just really loved seeing that and showcasing a different art style that people don't really think of, as well as just the fun that can be had. So a bit of a drop from the first book, but still a very good installment. I am very excited to see what other characters Albert chooses to focus on in an upcoming book. I don't know if one's been confirmed yet, but I am hopeful for it. I ended up giving this one about 3.75 stars. After that is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala, and this was my first cozy mystery. I really enjoyed it. The story is revolving around Leela, who works at her Aunt Rosie's Filipino restaurant, and a murder of her ex-boyfriend ends up happening in their restaurant, so naturally they are all assumed to be guilty. Leela is determined to prove her family's innocence and try to save the restaurant. I had a great time with this. The food descriptions in this one are amazing. Oh my gosh, I was reading it on the plane and I was so hungry. I will say, if you don't really care about food, this probably isn't for you because it can go on and on. I don't really mind that. I watch a ton of Food Network. Trust me, I will eat that up. Pun intended, yes. I really loved the diversity in this story. I've I've never heard of a Filipino cozy mystery, but not only that, many of the side characters were also Asian, and 𝗖cie did a great job of showcasing the differences, but also the similarities in the different Asian countries. Characters all have a major part to play and are each very distinct from one another, but I think how they're written does showcase that this is the first installment of a series. Specifically, in looking at Leila, I can expect that we're going to see a good bit of growth from her. She's not the most likable main character. I think she's relatable on one hand, but not always in a positive way. She kind of mirrors those negative emotions that people don't want to admit that they're feeling, but do. I think because of that, we can expect she is going to grow as the series progresses. We'll say, for a cozy mystery, this was a lot twistier than I expected going in. I don't know, I just really thought it was going to be pretty cut and dry. I did guess who did it, but that's not to say it was a bad thing. I still really enjoyed the mystery and liked watching Leila explore all these different avenues. There were a few red herrings here and there. Any of the side characters that she was suspicious of, I ended up falling in love with and really hoped they weren't the murderers. Two things I wasn't particularly crazy about. One, the way negative emotion is written in the story. It just seems very temporary and fast moving. No one really showcases grief or anger for more than a page, and I just thought that was really odd, particularly because our main character used to date the victim. And then secondly, unfortunately, there is a love triangle brewing, and I'm not looking forward to that. I already have one guy that I prefer over the other. I really hope that doesn't get dragged out for a long time. If it does, that's gonna annoy me. In the end, I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this first book, and I can't wait to continue the series. After that one, I continued the Green Creek series by TJ Klune. So first up was Heart Song, and this is the 3rd installment in which we are following our main character, Robbie. I can't really give much of a synopsis here, honestly, because it'll ruin prior books, but going into this, I wasn't really excited. Robbie hasn't been a favorite character of mine. I would actually say he was probably one of my least favorites, so I really didn't know how I was gonna like it, but I was happily surprised. If you're reading this series, I will say, when this book starts, you are going to be so confused as to what the heck is happening, but eventually once it clicked, I was on board. It kind of felt like fan fiction, which is what I keep spewing this book as, is like it sort of scratches that same itch as Teen Wolf fan fiction for me. The angst, tons. Nothing I didn't expect from a TJ Klune book, honestly, at this point. One major thing I can talk about is that this book tended to alternate between whether the relationship was the focus or the story's main plot was the focus. It alternated a lot, where it sometimes it seemed like all we talked about for the last 60 pages was the relationship, and then suddenly we'd shift over and it would be the plot for the next 100 pages. So pacing was a little weird. The main relationship in this story is between Robbie and someone from the Bennett pack, who I'm not going to name because spoilers, but that character is Ace, and I loved the representation of having a main romance be a asexual character who is not a romantic. This character also gained a lot more depth in this book, and I fell in love with him all the more. And Carter, like the oldest brother Carter, just he oh my god, I did not expect to just totally fall in love with him in this book, but he's so funny, he's so supportive, he's so sweet. Oh my gosh, I loved him so much. He is now like my new favorite character of the series. Honestly, just a perfect big brother character right there. Something else I've learned I really love in this series as it continues is how we see the progression of the relationship outside of the main character in whatever book we're reading, because obviously it's a pack. All of them are constantly around each other, so we get to see how the other relationships have grown from the prior books. I will admit, the conclusion of this book left me a bit unsatisfied. It felt like there was constantly something bigger on the horizon that we just didn't know what it was or when it was coming or how it was gonna come. But it did make me very intrigued to see how the series is going to end, which is why naturally I hopped right into Brother Song. This wasn't my favorite of the series, but I think it might be a second. My favorite's definitely Raven Song, but I don't know, man. Carter in this just was amazing. And this one, the main focus for the entire first half of the book is 100% characters and relationship, and I was all over it. Also, go watch my 24-hour readathon and watch me cry about this stupid family, because I think I counted like 20 times I cried. I also finished reading this on an airplane, and when I tell you I had to internalize all those tears, it was not easy, but I had to do it because otherwise people are gonna think I was weird. Well, I absolutely loved the relationships and romantic aspects of the story. Yes, because there was more than just the romantic relationship. Siblings and mother-son relationships in this, also freaking amazing. But the main plot felt a little too dire and a little bit kind of just like a combination continuation of the prior 3 books, which on one hand makes sense, but on the other hand kind of just felt like a letdown in the end. Just didn't really steal my attention. I kind of just kept blasting through those sections because I wanted to get back to relationships and romance and characters that I love. I gave this one 4 stars, but it's definitely a high 4 stars. I think it was actually more like 4.5 stars if I'm being honest here. And then finally, the last book I read this month was The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson, and I'm not going to give you an official review for this one either because you're going to have to wait for a specific video that I read this for. Alright y'all, so as always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today. I really appreciate it. If you want to keep up with what I am reading, my Goodreads, Storygraph, and Instagram are all linked down below. Make sure to hit like and subscribe as well. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!